Miike Barrett, who is the former Director of Strategy for the White House Homeland Security Council. He's joining us now from Washington, and he was also the intelligence officer for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Mike, thank you so much for joining us as well in the conversation in terms of where we go from here after bin Laden, and also about some of the details, learning more about the details of how this raid went down. There have been some reports suggesting that some published reports saying that perhaps bin Laden may not have had a weapon and may not have used his wife as a shield, and that some of the details of what was released earlier that the administration may be backing away from. What do you know about this?
Well, I think you always see that the first details to emerge turn out to be wrong, and so that's something that the intelligence community is very familiar with. And I think that on the one hand, one of the things I'm struck with as I watch the coverage of this is we all have a natural desire to know as much as we can about this because it's such a momentous and important event. On the flip side, I keep thinking about something like WikiLeaks, which was, of course, this just deluge of classified information, which had all these negative ramifications down the road. Ultimately, I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact we did exactly the right thing. We brought justice to this guy. We took him down. We did a surgical strike. There was no collateral damage. It was exactly the right decision to do. The SEALs carried it out amazingly. The intelligence community had been working this problem for 10 years. And I think some of the details that we're going to get wrapped around, while they're interesting and sort of salacious, the reality is that, ultimately knowing some of them could actually harm us in terms of future operations and the need to carry some things out.
Well, on that note, that there's been obviously a lot of pressure on the administration to release video of the burial at sea and/or still photographs of bin Laden's body. Do you think that would help or hurt us at this point?
I don't actually think that the videos would be good because if you show one video, they're going to want all the videos. And while it's believed that special operations, of course, would record everything that they do, there's certain reasons we don't want to betray their tactics, techniques, and procedures. So I think the videos are a bad idea. I think that frankly, the still shots are inevitable. They're going to come out, and so. Whether or not we want to message that as from the White House, or if you kind of want to let it happen on the side, that's one of those games that gets played here in Washington. I think ultimately that the pictures will come out. There's some very small segment of people that will never believe that he's actually gone, but it will happen, and the rest of us will be able to sort of have that additional final piece of closure.
The fact that some people are concerned that it will, stoke the fire and raise the ire of those other homegrown terrorists and all by releasing video or releasing photographs. Is that something that you're particularly concerned about, given the fact that we know that the United States remains an ongoing target, that we are under no assumption that with the death of bin Laden that terrorism ends? Does that bother you or concern you about whether or not this will make things even more difficult?
I think it's a factor, but ultimately, in the grand analysis of things, it's a minor factor. I know in a similar sense, we talk about whether we use drones, to carry out certain attacks, or we use ground forces or, regular manned aircraft. Ultimately, if we're killing people, engaged in conflict and they disagree with us, they're going to be mad. It doesn't really matter ultimately whether it's drones or not. I think so. Again, we get distracted by the trees and kind of miss the forest. I think that it does matter. I think that there will be retaliatory attacks. I'm hoping that they will be mostly low level because they'll be sort of reactive and, frankly, a little bit amateurish in conducting them. One of the things that may actually come out of this is that people will be forced to move around and try to conceal their tracks and try to go into hiding. And as they move from wherever they are into a sanctuary, that actually gives the operational forces another great opportunity to catch them up. So I think, there's a lot of great things that can happen coming out of an event like this. Unfortunately, one of the big negatives is that there will likely be attacks against U.S. interest. I think, my assessment, and I think that of most members of the community, is U.S. interest abroad are the most at risk. Domestically, we should all pay attention, find out how to be a part of the See Something, Say Something campaign that DHS has started, figure out how to feed information, official activities, suspicious activities reports into the fusion centers. And other than that, you kind of have to go about your daily life at this point. I think if they had a mass spectacular attack in the works, they would have already carried it out.
I think a lot of people are really fascinated by the details coming out of the day as it unfolded for the president and his team as this operation went down. Certainly, National Security Advisor was pointing out how this was an afternoon filled with incredible tension. Can you take us through some of that, knowing that what it's like to be involved with things of this nature, and what struck you as you were hearing some of the reports coming out of that operation itself?
Sure. I one of the things that's amazing about today's technology is that you can actually have eyes on the target and a real live feed all the way back into the situation room. And so that's got, it's kind of a blessing and a curse in some ways, because there's a lot of challenges in how do you carry out operations and do what you need to tactically when you've got your boss kind of looking over your shoulder. I imagine that this administration, like the last administration, knows to let the operators do their job. So they're watching because they want to be abreast of the information, but they're not trying to make any kind of decisions. So it's really almost like they're watching and it's real time, but it's not like they're giving orders directly to the field. And one thing that I think you do have to say this administration did extremely well was to keep a very tight cone of silence on this. They really kept the circle of people who knew very, very small. And, that inevitably means you've got a small group of people locked up in the room. They're not leaving the room because, you can't afford to have leaks and things like that. And, you've got a lot of high tension, a lot of high drama. But on the other hand, everyone in that room's a dedicated American who's serving the country, and they certainly were happy to be there and to witness the end of Bin Laden.
So if they're watching everything in real time, would they actually have witnessed Bin Laden being shot?
One would think so, yeah. I mean, which types of technology those particular military units carry with them is classified, but I would imagine that they would have video gear and things like that so that they're able to actually keep eyes on the targets.
Very interesting. Also, in terms of intelligence going forward, this is a big boost to the intelligence community. They needed a shot in the arm like this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in any struggle, in any battle, morale is really, really important. I think the intelligence community, as they always say, the entire community, whether it's DOD or CIA, variety of other agencies, it's only their failures that get well known and well publicized. And so it is a rare shot in the arm in terms of morale. I think they were justifiably, there were a lot of questions and concerns about some maybe leaning too much towards a legalistic interpretation and focusing on investigative opportunities pre-9/11. Since then, we've seen that the operators in the field have really embraced each other. The CIA and the DOD working very, very well together. We still have issues in D.C. about rice bowls and budgets and long-term planning, but out in the field, they're getting the job done. And so I think all Americans should take heart in that. It seems like it's amazing that it takes 10 years to track down a single person, but it's a big planet, and he could have been in a lot of plales.
Absolutely. So, I'm going to open the conversation now to my other guests here on the panel as well. Mike, so Rich, what do you think about the fact in terms of what this does to the intelligence community, in terms of giving them this boost in terms of knowing that they were able to get the job done?
I think it is a big boost, and also we should remind people about manhunts. The Unabomber was hiding in our own country for 20 years. FBI's most wanted for 20 years. His name at every post office in the United States, and it was just simply based on his brother seeing a letter, noticing the language of a letter printed in the New York Times that led the FBI to him. So manhunts take a very long time, and frankly, if the person hiding is good, as Bin Laden was, it's not that these are a series of intelligence failures, but a fantastic bit of success. And we tend to think of, we watch CSI and these other programs, we tend to think of the CIA as superhuman. But if you go into most of the government offices of these covert agencies, I'm sure Mike can say the same thing, they have computers older than anything in the Fox newsroom sitting there. I mean, they're still waiting,
They also have it. People don't realize
it's not a Hollywood movie.
Thousands of pieces of information that cross their desks every day that they have to make snap decisions on. Is this credible information or is it not credible information? To me, the boost in morale, when you have that job to be critiqued upside down for a decade and finally have such a great historic moment recorded, I think it's going to be astounding for their morale. And everybody's patting them on the back today.
And it's also a great team effort. I mean, everyone's focusing on the SEALs, but clearly there were analysts looking at who these couriers were. There was an NSA piece of this, looking at phone intercepts and movements of people in times of day. There was a Guantanamo piece of this with the interrogations, which were not enhanced, but were valuable. And then analyzing that. So the entire intelligence community owns different pieces of this, as does, frankly, the Air Force. We're focusing on the SEALs. Big team effort, though.
Mike, I know you've got to go in just a few seconds, but some final thoughts from you on this?
Sure. I just wanted to say I was in a different interview, and they were asking some specifics about how much does a Navy SEAL cost and how much for this team and that kind of thing. But I think your other guest's last point was exactly right. The SEALs are the kinetic part of this. They're the narrow end of the funnel, but there's a huge funnel of activity. The entire intelligence community is involved in something like this. I was privileged to be a part of it for a few years myself. it was an amazing thing to try to do, to try to track down this guy, but also all of his lieutenants and, frankly, the couriers and the other people who were working up to him, because that's how you track these guys. You got to find their supply networks and their financiers, and then you go after them, and then you pull the thread, and then you turn them, and you get information from them. And so I think exactly right. Having a place like Gitmo, being able to do the interrogations, being able to get little pieces of information. You never know what's important today until you can have a chance to analyze it tomorrow. And so you got to collect every single bit of data you can as you try to paint that picture.
Well, certainly it took 10 years, but we did it, and I think it's a great victory for this country. Thank you, Mike, for joining us with your insights. Really appreciate it today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, come back with much more on our discussion after this. Don't go away.